it's really important for me to ask this question. How many Seattle natives or residents do we have in the house? Raise your hand.
Got just enough.
So you're real excited right now. And how many football fans do we have in the house, yeah?
We got a fair share, all right. Our
And how many, since we're talking about the Players Tribune here, how many sports fans do we have in the house? Just overall sports. All right. Pretty impressive for a bunch of technologists, I just want to say. So the Players Tribune, as Cliff mentioned in our introduction, is an unusual thing in the media industry. And I think the best way to start off is, Jaymee, could you explain to me what the business model and actually the original, start with the original mission of the Players Tribune. What was it?
Derek Jeter and I partnered about 3 years ago, a little more than that. We actually started talking about the idea 5 years ago, trying to think about in a landscape that's so crowded in this day and age, and I think with headlines being what is the priority, how can we create a platform where athletes can connect directly with their fans without worrying about their words ever getting twisted?
Right.
And so it was more at that the simplistic point for how do we create this platform to be able to do that in a trusted, authentic environment. And since then, we launched 3 years ago. It's really just become this community of athletes. I mean, we've had almost 2,000 athletes, and we want to just make it easier to connect with fans and do it at the highest quality.
Can we talk a little bit about this twisting words thing? So, one of the sister publications to Fortune is Sports Illustrated, which I'm sure you've all heard of. Richard, do you feel like that's the case? What do you feel like you weren't getting from a traditional sports outlet that you felt that you're getting with the Tribune?
I wouldn't necessarily say Sports Illustrated because, Peter King and those guys do a great job of giving a story and writing and make sure it's written in a way that both sides are protected and benefit from. But a lot of times with standardized media and the way they typically cover athletes, especially in the social climate we're in now, it's all about clicks, it's all about attention, how many people can you get to your page, how much attention can you bring to your page, regardless of how the athlete feels about it or whether it's true or how detrimental it may be to someone's character or their personal life or personal endeavors. And I think that's where the relationship between athletes and the media has kind of fractured. And that's where the Players Tribune has been a godsend for a lot of these players, because it's allowing players to tell stories that may not necessarily be headline grabbers, but are powerful all the same and have the same inspirational elements that a kid, that them as a kid may have wanted to hear. Maybe you want to hear how this kid who lost his mother and his father persevered through all that adversity and still made it to be a successful individual. Maybe the kid needs to hear that, but you have certain media outlets that don't view those stories as powerful or as useful to their brand. And as players, you want that. You want to give those stories. You want to inspire people. You want to be part of the change. You want to be organic. You want to be genuine. You don't want to give a 30-minute interview and they take 1 minute of you telling a story about some gang violence you experienced to be the entire story. And I think the Players Tribune has allowed players of all calibers to express their story. You don't have to be the biggest star to give your story and to be powerful. You could be the last man on the roster. It doesn't make your story any less powerful than the Tom Brady's or the Russell Wilsons of the world. And I think that's what makes the Players Tribune so fantastic.
And you and I were talking backstage about the idea of a player kind of getting hemmed in, right? That you couldn't get kind of the full view of the person behind, in your case, the helmet, right?
Right. I think that players get kind of boxed in, and I guess it's always been that way. A football player is an athlete, or a basketball player, or track runner, or whatever, tennis player, you're an athlete, so you're boxed into a category as an entertainer. You're not seen as a socialist. You're not seen as an entrepreneur. You're not seen as an intellectual. And it's like anytime you give your opinions on anything other than the sport, they're like, oh, stop. You're just an athlete. You just play football. You just go back to your sport. And like, we're not people. And I think the Players Tribune, once again, allows people to take these athletes outside the uniform and see that we're people. We're intelligent individuals who have a lot more to offer than our athletic prowess. And I think that's one of the more powerful aspects of the Players Tribune.
So, Jaymee, let me come back to you. how do you make this work, right? We know that the media industry is all about attention, right? There's good attention, there's bad attention. You've demonstrated both, Richard. How do you make this work financially? Can you walk me through how the Players Tribune makes money?
Yeah, absolutely. But I think one last thing on Richard's point, which I think is important, is that our most successful stories aren't with the most popular names. And I think that's part of what drives the business, is that story is what people want to see. And that's why our engagement is incredibly high. Our average time on page is over 4 minutes. And it's because we're driving first with the story, and we're bringing a humanity, I think, to a lot of these athletes, really diving into the different dimensions that they have. From a business perspective, we just finished our Series C in January, so we're really building and scaling the business. We focused on brand partnerships as our first revenue stream. And for us, how do we take brands that are spending a lot of money in sports and amplify their brand so that they're already spending money and they care about sports? So a sponsor, let's say, of the Seattle Seahawks, or a big NFL sponsor, a great way for them to amplify their brand is through authentic content with the Players Tribune. And we did that last season. Richard did a weekly series where one of those brand partners were a part of that. And it's a great way for a brand to amplify their spend by connecting to athletes without a traditional endorsement and make their digital dollars a little more strategic.
So you said the first revenue stream is brand partnerships, but you said first. Are there more?
We wanted to get that part right because I think there's a huge opportunity there for us to really help brands be, like I said, strategic. Now we're starting to think a little bit more about, we don't want to do traditional advertising, so we're trying to think about innovative ways for brands to integrate into the platform without the traditional, display ads. So we're focusing on what's our rinse and repeat model. And now we're focusing, we just hired a CEO that's going to help us scale the business.
Mm-hmm. His name is?
His name is Jeff Levick. He was the Chief Revenue Officer at Spotify and worked at Google. And so we're really thinking about how do we scale this business and looking at other revenue streams, whether it's subscription, whether it's merchandising, e-commerce. I think there's a lot of opportunity when we take this really important it's an influencer community of athletes, and how do we continue to amplify that?
You told me a little bit about the kind of engagement, very long engagement, makes sense. Tell me a little bit about the success of the business. What can you tell me? How many employees do you have? How big was your Series C round? What's your revenue? Give me a sense of the good there.
Well, I think for us to grow, and we launched the day after Derek's last game, it'll be 3 years, October 1st. And in that time, we've grown to 60 full-time employees. Like I said, we've had almost 2,000 athletes contribute. 3 of our top 10 most successful stories are done by hockey players. Our engagement is incredibly high. We did actually a series last year. We have a format called Letter to My Younger Self, which was really successful for us. And we have a story that was written by Vernon Turner, who's a retired NFL player, who wrote this story, and it did so well. Now we're turning it into a feature film. We just finished a screenplay. So we're really focusing on how do we diversify our content. It was important to stay true. We did a lot of the long-form editorials in the beginning, and now we're focusing on video and doubling down on video. We launched our podcast network this past year and really continuing to scale the business.
Richard, I'm going to come to you. How does this make sense for you as a player financially, in terms of your overall brand plan?
Financially, as Jaymee said, as the Players Tribune grows, the players' revenue share and our value into the company grows. But aside from that, a player like myself, who's in terms of the public eye, I've had my ups and downs, either way, what I mean? Some people love me, and then some people feel the opposite of that. But the Players Tribune and the series that I've been able to be involved in allows me to be humanized. You take away the superstar and superhero aspect of how people view athletes at times, and you see me as a human being with my strengths and my flaws, my good and my bad, and you see that regardless of circumstance, regardless of the situation I've been put in, that I'm just a human being. I'm just another person. You know, I'm a dad now. You know, I try to put on diapers the right way, but they don't always go on the right way. You know, I try to, if you guys are parents, you know how that goes. I mean, if you haven't had your kid throw his diaper against the wall, you haven't really dealt with anything. But I think that's an important part of what we're trying to do is to try to get away from seeing athletes as something more than what they are. You know, they're just human beings. So our struggles, our headaches, our stresses, our strengths, our joy is the same as anybody else's. And we want to really express that to children more than anything, because I think sometimes kids look at us like, oh my God, I'd never get there. I'd never be where he was. He must have just born and been born and bam, he's an NFL player. You know, he never had to be a kid. He never had to be a 5-year-old, a 8-year-old, go through high school and deal with puberty and things like that, but we did, you know, and we want kids to understand that. We want them to understand that you will have struggles throughout your life. We did. The road to success is not a straight line, as all you guys know. It's filled with peaks and valleys and hurdles and potholes and a whole bunch of stuff. But if you're looking from the back view and just seeing the end of the race, then it kind of looks that way. It looks like this guy just must have made it, you know, straight out. But these stories need to be told, and people need to understand how tough and difficult the journey is and how every bit of adversity and every struggle can be overcome.
I think that's also just a really good point, because I think one of the things Richard does a really great job at is being relatable to a lot of these young kids. And he's done a few series with us with American Family Insurance where he's going back to the schools. We went to a school in Seattle. Richard went to a school in Compton. And being able to hear from someone like Richard that if you don't stay in school and if you don't focus on your priorities, if you're just thinking about being in the NFL, then you're not going to end up accomplishing your goals. And I think being able to continue to connect fans to athletes through this authenticity is really helpful for a lot of young kids too.
Now, what does the Players Tribune offer that, you know, your Facebook feed, your Twitter, all of the social media platforms available to the rest of us, you know, what does that offer you that those don't?
As you know, I mean, not every player, you know, not from lack of intelligence or anything of that matter, but not everybody's able to articulate their point the way they really want to. And some people find it better to dictate and then have somebody else pretty much put their thoughts onto paper. And I think that's the best thing for some of our players, because they have incredible messages and incredible stories, but if they were left to their own vices and to just, you know, write it, maybe video content, they do a great job, but not everybody feels comfortable doing it that way, but their stories are so powerful that they still deserve to be out there. And I think the Players Tribune allows players whose voice may not be as powerful or as polished as another's to get the same amount of exposure and the same amount of material.
Well, even the best reporters in the world have editors, right? So I think it's important. We want to give the athletes the toolbox that you would have at any other outlet to have access to the best editors, the best photographers, the best videographers. We're basically giving them the tools that you would get at HBO or GQ and have them for them to be the executive producer of every story that they want to share. I
see. Okay. We talked about the model a little bit earlier. You know, media industry is a tough business, right? There's a lot of change in it, right? And we've talked about some of that actually during this conference. How are you facing the risks of that, right? You mentioned that you're trying to get away from display advertising, which is extremely challenged, looking at brand opportunities. At the same time, those are cyclical. You know, how are you looking at the market so that you can make sure that you can keep growing? Because this is a tough business.
Yeah, no, I think that's part of why we really did start focus just on the long form editorial, because it was important to show what's our differentiator. Why we didn't want it. We're not doing scores and stats. We're not in the locker room. We're not chasing the same stories. So for us, it was the differentiator is the trust. So when the athletes are trusting our team, these are the stories that we're uncovering. A lot of the athletes are talking with our editorial team and not even realizing the stories that are going to end up coming out. But once that trust is there, we're finding some of these incredible stories. Daniel Carcillo, who played for the Blackhawks, talked about his best friend, Steve Monador from the Flyers, who committed suicide because there wasn't a transition program that the NHL had for athletes, and he was dealing with concussions. And there's a lot of these real issues that we're finding that athletes are really they all relate to each other. So how do we bring these athletes together in a community, which is just as important to us as the stories that are being told? And then how do we provide this forum for athletes? Like I said, if you're able to trust, there's that second level that you're able to share. And I think because that's what we, I heard someone, one of our editors actually compared our stories to the best chapter in a book. And so I think staying focused to those long-form editorials so we can show the difference that we had in the market helped us find our niche. And now we're really focused. Again, the difference is that it's coming direct from an athlete. An athlete's not looking at their watch. They only have 10 more minutes to talk with someone when it's their story. So as a result, you're getting a lot higher quality.
Yeah, I'm going to come to the audience in a minute for questions, so please prepare. So growth ambitions, you've got them. You've talked about the kind of financial stuff you have to do to get there. What about, I mean, what have you got on your roadmap? International, I think?
Yeah, well, we're really focused on diversifying our content so we can get beyond the written word. Video is a huge priority. Richard's doing a lot of that. We're excited about a new weekly show that he's doing this season. We launched our podcast network. CC Sabathia just launched his podcast on Monday, and we have 2 that we're in development on. And then, as you said, international is a huge priority for us. We're learning that the trust between athletes and some of the traditional media is almost worse in Europe. And again, we're not competing with the media. We really look at ourselves as a complement. So it's diving into the stories that Richard's talking about that a lot of these athletes have that you're not finding on traditional media outlets.
Right, and it would be important to note that, Richard, you do this weekly. Tuesdays with Richard on Thursdays. Can at least somebody explain to me why it's called that? Why?
Because it was awesome. But Tuesdays were our off days, and the story wasn't going to be released and published until Thursdays. So, it'd be weird to lie to people and say, I did it on Thursday when I'm at practice and I'm not going to do it on Thursday.
But that's a weekly show.
To be honest, we want to be genuine with everybody.
That's a weekly show. It's a big demand on your time, wouldn't you say? It
was a huge demand, and it's sometimes difficult to come up with content, as you know, on a weekly deal. But I just kept it authentic. I really just kept my thoughts, and when I had an opinion about something, regardless of how controversial or how crazy or how lack of controversial it was going to be, I delivered my message and I gave my points. And a lot of players, I got a lot of positive feedback about how incredible it was to just see somebody pioneer into a new industry and know that you're going to be criticized and still persevere. And I think that a lot of players are more willing to open up now and to do as I did, but now I'm going into a different realm and leaving that available for somebody else to do, because I think that there's so many guys with so many opinions that it'd be great to hear them. And I think that our fan engagement and the growth of our game has been so incredible that the fans are looking for more from their players, more than the snippets that they get in a press conference or the few controversial sound bites that they get. I think that this is going to be the bridge to the fans that we've been looking for.
So let's go to our 12th man, huh? Over here. Yes, please.
Matt Van Upsall with Herman Miller. Richard, this is for you. Do you get any pushback from agents, the NFL, owners, et cetera, or do you know other athletes that get pushback from agents, NFL, on working with an authentic storytelling company?
No, not from agents or NFL or anybody like that, but from our local media, from a lot of the traditional media guys that we've worked with, but ESPN has laid a lot of them off, so we don't get as much pushback from them now, unfortunately. It's really unfortunate what happened there, but it's a lot of times they're the most frustrated by it because sometimes they've burned bridges, they've kind of created the trust issues, the lack of trust because of the articles they've written. You talk to them for a long time and you're like, I'm giving you a ton of content, I'm giving you a great story, and they manipulate the story and grab the worst kind of headline out of it, and you're like, bro, I talked to you for an hour and you're going to put this 10 minutes of it in, and you're going to center the story around this when that was the smallest bit of the story I gave you. And I think that they feel threatened by a more genuine, organic content, and it's centered around the players, and it doesn't have to go through an editor. We don't have to worry about the headline being, Richard Sherman, once ran into a drug dealer. It'd be Richard Sherman grew up in a tough area and persevered and made his way out. Richard Sherman really cares about his family. It's not the most controversial headlines that you would get, and they're not click grabbing.
All right, right here. Yes, please.
Sure. Rob Biederman, founder of Catalent Technologies. Between what you guys are doing and what you see with Uninterrupted, Snapchat, Instagram stories, it seems like there's so many more rich, authentic ways for athletes to interact directly. And I hear the point about complement to traditional media, but where does this ultimately go outside of a live game? What is the role of traditional sports media 5 or 10 years down the road when everybody has a direct audience?
I think that's a question for them. I don't think there is a role, but that's just my opinion because they've kind of fractured it. They've destroyed it. They've destroyed what traditional media was. It used to be something powerful where they told cool, authentic stories, and now it's who got arrested for a drug deal or who they're almost like TMZ. And who would ever thought 10 years ago that traditional media and TMZ would be mentioned in the same sentence? Nobody would ever thought that, but that's the way the internet and society's going. So I think they're losing their place. They're becoming extinct because of that, because they took that risk and went down that road that they didn't fully understand. And it's a slippery slope, as you said.
And I think there's a lot more room for different players right now. So even how you see with Amazon investing in the NFL, how do people like us come up with good ideas for shoulder programming or being able to talk about the X's and O's? Because right now we haven't done as much about the X's and O's in sports, and I think there's a place for us to continue to do that at a high quality. Because who better to hear about what's happening in a game than from an athlete themselves?
Back here, yes, please.
Hi, Tyson Clark with Google Ventures. My question is around the demographic. Can you tell us anything that's really unique about the demographic that you're serving, both from an athlete's perspective and then also at the business level? Just in terms of what's different from kind of normal media outlets. Is it younger? Is it more diverse? Is it obviously more passionate about sports, probably? But any kind of observations?
I think one of the best numbers for us is a lot more female consumers of our content than most traditional sports outlets, and I think that's because of the humanity that we're bringing into a lot of these stories. There's so much more human interest.
Do you have a percentage?
We're about 25% female.
I also think you're reaching out to kids. I think a lot of times the younger generation is forgotten with traditional media. I mean, from time to time, you get a snippet of a story that's really directed at kids and shows how tough it can be and really relates to the struggles that they go through. But I feel like a lot more of our stories relate to kids and relate to how we were brought up, and especially kids in the inner city, because obviously in sports, for some reason, there's a predominant amount of athletes that come from the inner city or come from poverty, et cetera, and that story to those kids is life-changing. Just to show you and expand your mind and really inject that bit of hope that anything's possible, that bit of inspiration, I think, is incredibly powerful, and I don't think it's being portrayed as much in traditional media. So I think that's the difference. I
hear from a lot of parents that they read these stories to their kids. These are they're nice stories for a lot of parents to be able to. There's not as many sports-related content, I think, in the literary world. So I've heard a lot of that from a younger audience.
Interesting. All right, right here. Yes, please.
Hi, Patrick Egan, Qualcomm Ventures. Question for Richard. You're very outspoken off the field. You had a quote last week about maybe the potential as a union to strike, right? Vis-a-vis your MLB peers and NBA, the lack of guaranteed money. Maybe elaborate a bit, maybe the leadership that you're going to take among the player union. And two, why didn't you publish that on the Players Tribune? Why'd you give that exclusivity to Deadspin?
Because I didn't give it to anybody. I just said it in a public interview. But I'm going to go in more depth about it on the Players Tribune because it was limited. It was a short time interview, and no way I could deliver every point that I wanted to deliver. But it's such a long play. You know what I mean? I didn't just do that snippet to say, oh man, I want to get people excited for now. It's such a long play. We have years before our collectively bargained for agreement expires. But I want players to be informed, and I want them to understand the sacrifice that you may be forced to make in order to get what you really want to get. And MLB and NBA were the examples I took because they missed games. The NBA missed, I think, half the season to make that point. And they lost some, but they got a lot of the things they required. And I think the NFL has had strikes in the past, but they failed. A lot of them have failed, but it's because players are ill-informed. Nowadays, you have so much connection. You know, the internet is so powerful. I can get a message out to the entire league in a flash. I don't think they had that kind of continuity back in the olden days. So I think there's a point there, but really what I want for our players is longevity. I want security. You know, it's such a violent game. There's a 100% injury rate. Every player will be injured at some point or another. Will they be able to persevere through that injury and continue to play? You know, is for them to determine, but there's a 100% injury rate, so I want them to have financial security. If you play 3 years, I want you to have 3 years worth of play. If you have a 4-year contract, I want you to see 4 years worth of contract pay. A lot of times in our game, a guy could have a 4-year contract, get injured in the first year, and never make it to the second year of his contract. And you know, what's the point of signing these long-term deals and these guys, you know, putting these fluff numbers up? Oh, the guy signed 4 years, $60 million, when the guy really only saw probably $5 million of the deal. And I think I want that to be seen. I want that to be understood. And, you know, obviously it's different for everybody, but I'm just working to protect our players.
Well said. All right, this last one right here. Yes.
Hi, Ryan from Herman Miller. Question for Jaymee. I'm a lifelong hockey fan. Hockey players have historically been very stoic, very self-edited with the media. It's very frustrating for fans. Somehow Players Tribune has gotten them to open up and be so vulnerable. How did you make that happen?
I think firstly, to your point, it's an underserved market. So there hasn't been customarily the main traditional media outlets looking for those stories. So I think part of the reason why they didn't exist is because the traditional media wasn't telling them. And then we have such an incredible editorial team they're huge hockey fans. And once we told a couple of them, we have hockey players calling us all the time. And it's just become a place where, I mentioned Daniel Carcillo before, he reached out to us when he was playing. So for us, it's a community that we've become very much a fan of. Like I said, we've had some of our most successful stories. Patrick O'Sullivan, I could name 10 that have done so well. So yeah, it's one that we'll continue to do a lot more with.